Hello everyone, this is Andres Restart, and welcome to the third installment in this series, where I play through the original Ocarina of Time, and talk about different changes we could see in the different sections of Ocarina of Time in this now long-rumored, theorized, and widely reported ambitious remake for The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. We've been talking about a lot of different things we could see in the beginning of the game surrounding Kokiri Forest, inside the Deku Tree, but then in the second installment we talked a little bit about Hyrule Field, Castle Town, Hyrule Castle, and even Lon Lon Ranch. But once we get beyond there, we head towards Death Mountain, the mountainous region of Hyrule and Ocarina of Time. What changes might we see there? Well, quite a bit I would say. So that's what we're getting into today. But first, a brief message. If you are like me, you probably don't like having too many unhealthy energy drinks. I remember one time I had a Red Bull at the wrong time, and let's just say, it did not give me wings. But maybe I'm a bit weird. I don't even like coffee. But I still gotta get up early in the mornings, I gotta find a way to focus with my work, keep myself going when I'm playing sports or working out, and at the end of the day, it would be nice if I still had some energy left over to play some games too. There is no replacing a healthy diet or good rest, but these powders from Drink Gamer Girl can certainly help and make for some tasty drinks with various flavors. Their energy powders provide clean energy. It's sugar-free and only 10 calories per serving with natural caffeine sourced from green tea. Then there is the Focus Powders. It's great to help you focus during your gaming or studying sessions, one of the standout ingredients being Alpha GPC, known for supporting brain function and memory. And finally, there's the Hydration Powders providing all-day recovery. This one is caffeine-free, great for any time in the day, including workouts. It's an optimized electrolyte blend to help keep you hydrated. I use this one a lot. Drink Gamer Girl actually works with a lot of creators to create custom designs with flavors you can choose. For example, with the Hydration Powder, I have this delicious lychee flavor adorned with the channel logo. So if you're looking for some tasty yet healthy energy drink solutions, and maybe your own custom merch, check out Drink Gamer Girl, using promo code DGG for 10% off one item or add 2 more to the cart for even more savings when you also click with the link in the description below. So shortly after leaving Lon Lon Ranch, I did explore a little bit more of Hyrule Field. And something I fell into is one of the many holes you see scattered all throughout Hyrule Field. There are different little chests you can find, and it does vary up the experience a bit, but as we discussed last time, if they are going to be very ambitious with this remake, more than just a visual enhancement here, then expanding Hyrule Field will make a lot of sense. And while I do think these little mini holes should stick around, thinking about more modern Zelda games and how they've filled up these giant areas, in Twilight Princess they had random caves that you could break into that were basically expanded versions of these little holes, or in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom they had the many shrines you could find all throughout. I do think they should mix up the challenges a little bit here. There should be a little bit more thrown in, some little mini dungeons, some caves you can find, and yes, some holes as well that have more than just a small little hallway with a chest at the end and just a Deku Baba or two. Make it a little bit more challenging, perhaps add a puzzle here and there to give a little bit more to explore in Hyrule Field. But getting out and deciding to move towards Death Mountain, I get a nice look at the sky. You see Death Mountain off into the distance. But something I noticed that should definitely change is the skybox. Like, you don't want to see these fake lines. You want to be able to see the clouds moving naturally, not just this one basic texture that's rotating around above you. And going a step further here, I do think they should adjust the day-night cycle. You see, in Ocarina of Time, the day-night cycle was quite abrupt. You'd be out in Hyrule Field, and within just a minute or so, I have to check the times, but it's a very quick turnaround between day and night. But when you enter towns, the time remains at the exact same time. When I originally played through the game as a child, I thought this is a very interesting thing. I wondered why all these towns were suspended at a particular time. I wonder if this was just a decision made due to technical limitations. This was the first 3D Zelda game after all. But nowadays, day-night cycles occurring within towns is just the normal thing. And I would actually say it's kind of annoying to go into Kakariko Village and see that there's only a particular quarter of the day where you can visit the graveyard and hang out with Dampy. And if you get the time wrong, you have to leave the town, hang out outside for a minute or two as time passes quickly to go back in. I would say that looking at it from a modern standard, a modern perspective, this is immersion breaking and it's kind of annoying. So I think they should do away with this system and they should just have a normal day-night cycle where the day-night cycle works the same regardless of whether you're in Hyrule Field or in a town, which would make sense because we've already talked about how it also would make sense to just have one continuous world, not have just separate zones where you load in from one to another. If the world is going to be seamless, then a seamless day-night cycle across the different areas would also make sense. This would also mean, however, that all the different towns, including Kakariko Village, are going to need NPCs that move around a bit more realistically, like you're going to have to see them walk from one point to another as the day shifts. They're going to need a little bit of a schedule, kind of like how it works in Majora's Mask, or how it works in Hateno Village in Breath of the Wild. But once you get out into Kakariko Village and you're exploring around, there are different little things that I think should be also fixed up, like the construction workers. You look at them, you'll just see them running from one point to another back and forth. There's no actual building. You don't see any hammering, you don't see any sort of construction. They should be updating the animations, perhaps giving them a little bit more of a sophisticated schedule where you see them actually working to build something here. I'm not saying the building actually has to be happening, but just having this dude running from one side of the beam to another all throughout the day doesn't really make that much sense. Back in 1998, we might be more forgiving for behavior like this, but now, especially based off the story here, either A, they're actually building, or they're lazy, as their boss is always complaining about them not being too ambitious. So I'd like to either see them just kind of finding a way to slack off in a funny way, or we actually see them working to build here. Now, something else that will obviously be fixed is like the window frames. If you look in the original, you can see them popping off the building depending on the angle. Little things like this, of course, are going to be improved upon because we're expecting some modern visuals here. But with the modernization of the visuals of this game, there are some things I'm concerned about, and that is the tone. So, for example, when you go into the graveyard and you find a way into this tomb, you'll see a whole bunch of skeletons. Not all of them are for humans, they're for different creatures, but there are some human-like skeletons. And they were able to get away with this back in 1998, and there are other parts that are even darker later on to the game. But I do wonder how Nintendo will decide this will need to be depicted in this modern version. I really hope they maintain this dark look, this dark tone for these areas. In my opinion, it's a big piece to the overall essence of Ocarina of Time. It's not like there aren't skeletons in modern Zelda games, but seeing skeletons of actual people is a little bit darker. But as long as blood is not smeared all over the walls, I think they should be able to get away with it without having to increase the ESRB rating. But on the note of very dark areas, when we're in Kakariko Village, it would be nice if we saw some level of foreshadowing with the well. You see, when you first explore Kakariko Village, there's just a random well, there's nothing to it, but there is something to it later on. And I'm not asking for it to be totally spoiled here, but something to kind of hint at that there's something more to this well than it just being a well would be nice to see added with our first visit to Kakariko Village. Now, finally actually trying to get into Death Mountain. I completely forgot I had the letter, so I actually went back to Hyrule Castle thinking I needed to get the letter from Princess Zelda even though she already gave it to me. And something interesting I noticed is that Impa does have to guide you back, and so technically she did it the first time as well. There's just a little bit more dialogue to suggest that if you go back again. But in the prior installment, I was talking about that maybe they should allow us to explore a bit more of Hyrule Castle. It's all there, and all of us are wondering about what is inside the castle, but they never actually let us see the castle or the king. Maybe an opportunity to add in a little bit more exploration of the castle is us actually following Impa through the castle or a part of the castle to get out without being detected by the guards. This would fit within the flow of the currently established story for Ocarina of Time, and would be a great way to allow us to see a little bit more. But now, actually entering Death Mountain. When you meet your first Goron, something I noticed is just the overall color of the environment. Like, the mountain depicted in Ocarina of Time is very, very basic, and the color of the rocky walls right behind the Gorons, they blend in really well. Too well, I would argue. You look at more modern depictions of Gorons around Death Mountain, and you can more clearly see the difference. Gorons tend to lean a little bit more yellowish, while Death Mountain has leaned a little bit more reddish to help differentiate them a bit more. So some subtle color choices here, of course, are going to have better lighting, better shadowing, better texture detail. All of this stuff is going to allow the characters to look more like proper characters and not blend in so well when that's not the intention. Now, as you explore around Death Mountain, getting to know the Gorons, you start to learn that there's a problem. The problem, in part, is that the Gorons are starving. They've lost access to their precious sirloin rocks that they get from Dodongo's Cavern, because Dodongo's Cavern has been overrun by Dodongos far more than usual. And so we should actually see Gorons being depicted as hungry. You don't really see that in the original Ocarina of Time. I want to see some starving Gorons. I want to see some facial expressions that show that they're uncomfortable. Maybe show some Gorons that actually look underfed. And then when you do beat Dodongo's Cavern, I want to see Gorons actually eating these rocks, the same way we see them in Breath of the Wild. And I want to see a difference where the Gorons look happy and not underfed and not hungry, but full and joyous. You see, stuff like this, even if they're not going super ambitious with this remake, even if it's just a modernization from a visual perspective, stuff like this I would expect to be depicted. A lot of the things that are missing in the original are due to the limitations of the time. Another perfect example is Darunia, the main Goron. When you speak to him, he's angry. He tells you that he's angry. But there's nothing about his expression in that initial conversation that shows that he's angry. And so, as we've talked about before, there should be more detailed facial expressions, more animations. Characters should be a lot more lively. Even when there's not a cutscene, as you've seen in prior Zelda games, characters would have more expressions. They would make certain noises to suggest their conversation, even if it is just text. But we've also talked about how it makes a lot of sense for there to be some extensive cutscenes with voice acting in this game for the main moments, just like in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And I do think when we meet Darunia, that should be one of them. And so I'm expecting that when we finally go into his room, it's going to lead into a cutscene where we see Darunia, we see his face, there's an actual conversation that happens there, and you can see just how angry he is. Now, after meeting Darunia, you do have to make your way back to the forest, and you have to go to a special part of the forest, the Sacred Meadow. And I love that they have you go here so early on. But the lead up to the Sacred Meadow, in my opinion, has to change drastically. No more can the Lost Woods just be these different squares. They would have to rework the Lost Woods, somewhat similar to how it works in Breath of the Wild, where it's just like one natural looking forest, but you do get lost if you go too far in the wrong direction. Now, the atmosphere, the overall aesthetic of the Lost Woods in Breath of the Wild is very different from how it is in Ocarina of Time. And so they are going to need to depict a natural looking forest with magical quality, where if you go in the wrong direction, you will find yourself at the very beginning again. But it's going to need to look like an actual forest leading you to the Sacred Meadow. And then when you get into the Sacred Meadow, there is like this maze, and at this point in the game, the camera is taking a top-down view, so you can see the maze. I'm not entirely sure how they would handle this. I think you should still keep the maze, and so maybe you do still keep this top-down view for this part of the experience. Or maybe you don't. Maybe the maze becomes more challenging if you can't just see every single turn. Maybe it becomes more like a proper labyrinth where it becomes a new experience and you have to find a way using different markers to get to the other side, which I think would be very cool. And in the lead up to this, to where you're going to meet Saria, I also think they should be adding more to show a history here. Like, there's a little bit of a journey like this in Twilight Princess, and you do see a lot of ruins, a lot of suggestion of an ancient history here. And so clearly there's a very special building ahead. What is that building? Is there anything going on in the environment that kind of adds to that? And so I want to see a little bit more about that. But coming back to Death Mountain, finally gaining access to Dodongo's Cavern, When you get inside, there are some things I noticed that I want changed here as well. So like in the more modern Zelda games, if you do fall into lava, we should see basically like a burning animation where you melt down in the lava. But something that I think is maybe a vastly bigger deal is what's going on with the Dodongos themselves. I mentioned earlier how the Dodongos are overrunning Dodongo's Cavern. They're becoming a serious problem, but there's only like 3 normal adult-sized Dodongos in Dodongo's Cavern. That doesn't really make that much sense. It doesn't really depict the cavern being overrun by Dodongos. There should be a significant shift here. There should be Dodongos everywhere, and they should really make it feel like there is a problem with this, like it's actually being overrun. That's the story, so actually depict the story. And naturally, this would also impact the way the dungeon works. I think for the first 3 dungeons of Ocarina of Time, even in this remake, they should keep them relatively simple. Things get more ambitious as you get older. So I don't want to go too far in thinking about a lot of changes for the early dungeons. But at least this point, I think it makes a lot of sense. They should better depict the actual problem here and put more than 3 adult Dodongos in the cavern. And yes, remix the structure of the dungeon a bit as well. Keep the core concepts like the giant Dodongo skull and having to bomb away at the eyes, that makes sense. But maybe play around with some of the puzzles, like something I noticed. When you do meet one of the adult Dodongos and they blow fire at you, because my brain's already coated with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom in mind, the modern Zeldas, I thought, maybe the fire being blown by the Dodongo could turn on this torch. It does not work that way in Ocarina of Time. It should work that way in the remake. There should be more modern fire physics and things like that. The things we've come to expect in modern Zelda, these little fixes should be added here, and perhaps there can be actual challenges and puzzles built around this. Maybe you will be locked in a room with the Dongos and you have to light certain torches, but you have no access to fire. But you do have access to the Dodongos going at you who do blow fire. So adjustments like these I think would be very fun. They would vary up the dungeon and it would make it feel more like modern Zelda while still retaining that core essence of Ocarina of Time. But on the note of just the physics of the world, something else I noticed that was a little annoying is that if you jump towards a ladder, you don't grab onto it. That should be fixed. If you're jumping to a ladder, you should be able to grab onto it. Link can handle that. So that should be done. Something I think is extremely important are the main bosses for every dungeon in Zelda. Ocarina of Time has some of the most amazing epic dungeons with some really cool names, such as King Dodongo, the Infernal Dinosaur. It's such a cool name, and it is a pretty big enemy for our expectations, at least back in the time in 1998. But something I've always wondered about is the giant Dodongo skull in the main area of Dodongo's Cavern. That is a far bigger skull than the skull of King Dodongo. I think they should make it the case that that giant skull is actually foreshadowing the boss fight for the area. So yes, I'm asking for King Dodongo to be made bigger, more epic, more scary, more intimidating. And with that greater size, they're also going to have to change around the arena. The arena is actually pretty small, and it doesn't really make that much sense. Like, how did King Dodongo even get in there? There's just a small hole that gets you in there. So maybe like a Dodongo, I guess, grew up and became King Dodongo, but why would it be a King Dodongo if there's no other Dodongos to govern if it's just stuck in this hole? So I think they should completely rework the arena in which you fight King Dodongo, and they should make him larger and add more to the battle. Like perhaps that puzzle where you're bombing away at the eye sockets for the giant skull is a little bit of a hint to the actual boss fight later on. Or when you're fighting the adult Dodongos, how you have to attack the tails, maybe that's also a hint as well. These are all different hints throughout the dungeon that will help you with the final fight. And so what I'm suggesting here is that they're adding more phases, make it a more involved battle. Maybe actually I get to climb on at certain points. Like King Dodongo's gonna roll around and there's going to be a challenge with getting to his tail, but perhaps getting to his tail allows you to climb on and bomb away at his eyes. And I still think they should have the moment where this King Dodongo is all consuming and throwing a bomb in there can certainly cause a reaction. But my point is I think they should make this fight bigger, more ambitious, more phases, and have it make sense with the environment. Now, once you beat Dodongo's Cavern, you have a cool moment with Darunia and the other Gorons. I've always found this scene to be very funny. I hope this sticks around. They need to retain the humor. Playing through Ocarina of Time, I don't even know how many times I've replayed this game. It's been so many different times. I always go back to it every few years. But playing through it now, and just thinking about all of these changes they can make for a remake, I'm just reminded of how much detail they put into this game for the time. Like, this was the first 3D Zelda game. This was when they were still figuring out how 3D games worked. I actually think it's pretty amazing just how much detail they were able to put into this game for the time. And so having these funny scenes where the Gorons are trying to hug you and they scare away Link, it's cool, and every time I see it, it always gives me a little bit of a chuckle. It puts a smile on my face. I want all of that humor, all that personality to still be there in the remake, but I would love it if they could expand on that as well. Now, this is a little thing, but I do think these little things were things we would gloss over with the first 3D Zelda back in 1998, but now should probably be adjusted upon. When we're climbing up even higher in Death Mountain, going towards the Great Fairies Fountain, there's an eruption that happens, and it happens every few moments. I'm not asking for that to be changed per se, but when you get to the very edge where you're going to start climbing up, the eruptions stop. It doesn't really make any sense. It's just extremely convenient. I would argue so convenient, it's immersion breaking. It's reminding you that this is a video game, and they just had that as an obstacle. And so I think they should adjust things a little bit. Like, there should still be that obstacle, there should still be the recurring eruptions, but maybe they design that climb up in a way where you're looking for cover as you're climbing up vertically, and not just going up this kind of incline at first. But the whole experience, there should be those eruptions with different ways to hide and cover yourself. But also, I then ask, why are these eruptions happening and with so much frequency? Maybe there should be something there. Maybe this is an opportunity to tease or foreshadow Volvagia. Maybe you hear the dragon's roar, or you see something flying high up in the sky that is Volvagia. Something that shows that there's something bigger stirring within the volcano. I'm not asking for a big reveal, but just like a subtle, cool teaser, a foreshadowing. But now, when we do get into the Great Fairies Fountain, we're going to see the first Great Fairy on our adventure here. And this is one of those things where I have to wonder how they might go about handling this, because, you know, back in the day, this is a woman who's nearly completely naked, but with like some vines or something covering her barely. I do gotta wonder how they might go about handling her design or their designs in a modern depiction with far more detail. I gotta think that there's going to need to be some design changes with the clothing. I still think they should be depicted as these beautiful women. Perhaps even, yes, somewhat revealing, but not so revealing that it looks like they're completely nude with just a few vines covering them. Like, there needs to be a little bit of an adjustment there. And the last thing I'll speak on here is Kaepora Gabora's glide. He takes you down Death Mountain, which is a great way to get back down to the bottom, but it's little shortcuts like these that were added, I think in part to mitigate the lack of fast traveling early on. And so thinking about this, I'm a bit divided on how they should handle fast traveling in this remake. If they are going to expand the world, then the world's going to be bigger, and thus traveling around will become perhaps even more cumbersome without having fast traveling, unless they're giving us more ways to move around. Like, what if Kaepora Gabora's glide is at first just a cutscene, or maybe they even turn it into a fun minigame, but that becomes something that you can use later on. Maybe there's some sort of challenge you can eventually handle that will unlock some sort of gliding ability that Kaepora Gabora could teach you, for example, which then will allow you to do something somewhat similar to the paraglider in Breath of the Wild, which would speed up a lot of your movement and mitigate the need for needing to have fast travel. You do eventually unlock fast traveling as an adult because you gain these different songs that take you to the different dungeons, but that's very limited. So I imagine things changing in one of three different ways. One, well, I guess this would be them not really changing much at all. Two, if there are going to be significant changes to the world, that they're going to need to give us different ways to go about the world more quickly. Or The third option, they're just going to add fast travel points like you would expect in a lot of modern games, including Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And when you do eventually get to the adult phase where you're learning these different songs, those songs have a different purpose, and it's not just about getting you to the dungeon area. But we'll talk more about that possibility in a future installment. What do you all think, though? What sorts of changes do you think we could see in the Death Mountain region or section of this game? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.